Cantarella has quite some interesting quirks about her, but with how stacked the reruns are after her banner, and how stacked the characters are that are probably going to come after Cantarella, many people are probably wondering if they should be pulling for Cantarella or not. Well, I'm going to list some of her biggest pros and cons to let you decide whether or not you should pull for Cantarella. The first thing to mention is the fact that she actually frees up your Zhezhi. Zhezhi has become a very contested character ever since 2.0 with the release of Carlotta, because not only is she now best in slot with Jinshi, but also Carlotta. These are both very high ranked DPS characters, in the top tiers for tower, and still very good for brute forcing for the Whimpering Wastes. So Zhezhi is incredibly popular and incredibly needed, but considering you only have one Zhezhi on your account, you're gonna need to find an alternative for the other team. Many people have turned to Yang Yang or Changli for their Carlotta, or even a Wenwu or a Mortefi for their Jinshi, but Cantarella is finally going to give us our proper Zhezhi replacement for in-Jinshi teams. Much like Zhezhi, Cantarella is able to amplify resonant skill damage by 25% using her outro skill, and this is a pretty good ability to have, considering the fact that Cantarella also has coordinate attacks, making her a pretty good character to use with Jinshi. There are however some complications. Because her Resonance Liberation is incredibly integral to her Concerto energy generation, you're not really able to have a rotation where you go from your healer into Cantarella, then Jinshi, back to Cantarella, and then Jinshi again. You're gonna have to use Verena and do a standard healer Cantarella Jinshi rotation. Also, unlike Zhezhi, Cantarella cannot give energy to Jinshi, meaning that she is going to have to build more energy regen than usual, which is a pretty big downside in my opinion, but still the point stands. Cantarella Jinshi is a pretty good synergy, and it's going to be better than most of the other characters who can technically synergize with Jinshi. The next thing I would like to talk about concerning Cantarella is the fact that she is able to heal. Healing is a pretty nice positive to have, especially considering the fact that Cantarella is a sub-DPS. Sub-DPS characters usually don't have healing in their kit, only really changing ever since Brant, who is the literal current banner. So it is a pretty unique attribute to see. While much of the content right now doesn't really require any healing, we can still exploit this to our benefit. We can run a team of Jinshi, Cantarella, and Zhezhi, running Cantarella on Rejuvenating Glow. This allows us to swap into Jinshi more often, which will be a pretty decent upgrade for Whimpering Wastes. Also, because Cantarella is able to heal, it means that she is going to be an amazing pick when it comes to safety for some of your characters. For example, a character that a lot of people talk about being unsafe to play is Don Jin, and because Cantarella is a Havoc sub-DPS, she's also going to be buffing Don Jin's damage, which means that Cantarella and Don Jin might be the new best team for all of those main DPS Don Jin players. And it's also just nice for general safety. While people like me might not fully appreciate the healing, there is definitely still people in the community that simply aren't that good at dodging or just want that little bit of extra comfort. So Cantarella being able to heal is something I feel like I should mention. And then the final positive I wanted to talk about with Cantarella is the fact that she has a pretty good amount of potential to become better in the future. Now, I know I'm usually not an advocate for future impacting, but here's the thing. Cantarella is able to buff Havoc damage and skill damage with her Ultra skill, but outside of Don Jin, we don't really have any characters who primarily do Havoc skill damage. This means that a future character, most likely Frolova, it's probably going to specialize in this. And if Frolova is one of your favorite characters, Cantarella might actually be worth the pickup. However, I would like to mention that Kuro Games very often runs characters using their best supports as the second banner. For example, we got a Zhezhi rerun with Carlotta, and we got a Yinlin rerun and a Shengliao rerun side by side. So the chance is very likely that if Frolova does end up being a Cantarella user, we are just going to see Cantarella's first rerun be alongside Frolova. Now moving on to the bad stuff, and let me tell you, this character is not absolved of her sins. First of all, I would like to talk about that Cantarella suffers from something I would like to call second best syndrome. This essentially entails that characters aren't really best with any particular character and tend to just be an alternative for a bunch of characters. Now, for a lot of people, this is going to be very valuable. Hell, it's one of the reasons that I'm a Changli Glazer. but some will be pretty appalled by the fact that Cantarella is best in almost no teams. If we think about it, Cantarella is best with skill damage dealers and havoc damage dealers, but when we look at the roster, many of them already have better supports. For the skill damage side, we have Jinshi, Changli, and Carlotta. For literally every single one of them, Zhezhi is better, and Changli also has Brant and numerous quick swap comps. So let's be honest here, you're only really pulling Cantarella for any of these characters if you're trying to use your Zhezhi with one of them and need an alternative for the other. And then on the Havoc damage side, there's the Havoc Rover who prefers running Donjin, Camellia who prefers to run Donjin, Sanhua, or Rochia, and then there's DPS Donjin, who does use Cantarella to be fair. So as you can see, there's not really any teams where Cantarella is the definitive best character other than DPS Donjin. Next up, the amount of energy regen this character needs is kind of absurd. It's more than any other sub DPS I know of. In a team of Camellia, Cantarella, and Shorekeeper, Cantarella is going to need a whopping 143% energy regen. This is more than any other sub DPS in the entire game. The highest we'll see from other characters is around the 120 mark, maybe even 125. So Cantarella going above 140 is kind of absurd. I can see a lot of people just choosing to run an energy regen free cost, and if not that, you're going to have to grind on energy regen on every single piece. So if you hated building Brant, guess what? You're building Brant again, except this time she's Havoc. Now while this does get lowered in other teams, for example in a team of Cantarella, Jinshi, and Zhezhi, the energy requirement is only about 127%, but this is still higher than any sub DPS in the game. So Cantarella's massive energy needs is honestly kind of wild. Next up, I want to talk about her weapon options. Her signature is incredibly powerful, probably one of the most stacked signature weapons we've ever seen, but it's not exactly very universal. But because the signature weapon is so stacked and characters tend to be balanced around their signatures, Cantarella kind of runs into an issue where the alternatives are pretty far behind. Now, while it's by no means a Brant situation, it gets shockingly close. For Brant, his second best in slot is 20% worse than his signature. For Cantarella, that would be 15%. Even the fabled String Master is 20% worse than Cantarella's signature weapon. So if you're unwilling to get her signature, the gap between Cantarella and the supports she was already not beating just becomes even bigger, and she's just less worth pulling for, especially considering the fact that Zhezhi has alternatives that are incredibly strong and close to her signature weapon, like, for example, String Master. Now, Cantarella is definitely a very unique character, and I know a lot of people do like her, so I understand that it might come as a shock to you that she's not really that good of a character. Honestly, one of the more disappointing ones we've gotten in a while. But much like with all the previous disappointing characters like Rochia, they will get better. Kuro Games doesn't allow a character to be bad for long, and even if it's not through a new game mode, it's most likely going to be through a new character, which in my opinion is probably going to be Frolova. So are you guys going to be pulling for Cantarella? I'm probably going to skip her, but let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, join my Discord, which is linked in the description. If you have any questions, that is going to be the place I am most likely to answer them. But that'll be it from me. Peace.